So, I always wanted to make a video or to explain a idea that I had that I've always toyed around with, but not ever really been able to formulate it. And it's not a perfectly thought out idea. It still has a lot of kinks. But here's my attempt at it. So people and myself and basically everyone else on planet Earth are watching the progression of AI. Some of us are working to adapt. Some of us are missing out. But everybody, will have an opinion on it and everyone will experience it in a different way. And so there's lots of theories. I mean, it's unbelievable how many theories there are about what are the implications of AI economically, socially, culturally, biologically, politically. We'll definitely do deep dives on all of those theories. But I have a theory. I've never heard it expressed either by someone else, so maybe that's why I'm excited about it, is that the advent of artificial intelligence is really just the evolution of language and not an evolution in technology. And I mean, maybe the argument for its technological breakthrough is scaling laws, which I probably would agree with, is that you've reached this explosion point where the compute can be scaled up. You essentially can just throw so much raw compute at a problem that's not been that you were not able to do that before. One day I'll make a video about why we're not able to do it before, but let's just say that there's some hardware innovation. Truly, there really is a hardware innovation and a parallel processing innovation, which is fascinating. But in terms of the software innovation, if you genuinely understand how LLMs work, LLMs are basically compression of knowledge and then re-extraction of that knowledge all through text format. Now, video models are different. They use stable diffusion, and again, that's a really interesting psychological concept as well. But coming to just standard large language models, well, first of all, it's inherent in the name that it's a language model. I mean, it is a processing unit for language. And so here's my thought, here's my theory, which is that humans, before learning how to write, learned how to communicate. I'm doing like this entire anthropological breakdown of human networks. We'll definitely talk about almost all of the linguistic networks in those podcast episodes. But anyway, listen, they came to communicate in a variety of ways. Languages all across the world, sounds, music. This all predates written text. And then we invented language, and kind of classical or traditional mainstream historical thought is that language emerged in Mesopotamia in the form of something called cuneiform, which resembles Egyptian hieroglyphics. Basically, this is pictograms. These are not words. These are images that, if you've ever seen kind of Egyptian hieroglyphics, you'd know what I'm talking about. Mesopotamia cuneiform is the same thing. And what this is like is that you're trying to compress information. So like, oh, it's a bird. And so you obviously want to pass this on to posterity. And again, now, I mean, you have lifetime communication between two people is enormously complex. I mean, what the brain is doing is hearing. I mean, it's not even hearing, it's receiving sensory signals from the ears that someone else is speaking. And then it's compressing that, like almost all information is compressed through neural pathways into the brain, reaching a part of the brain which is then unpacking that in not the voice that was you heard, because that's almost impossible, but in some other voice. Maybe it sounds similar to the one you heard, you don't actually know, but and you're trying to make sense of it, you're trying to extract it. So that's one-to-one communication, and it's all happening in lifetime. It's enormously complex. It's incredible that humans invented that. Obviously, we'll dive into why they did. But now, coming to why writing was important, humanity realized that you don't just want to communicate with your current colleague or the person, you're the person that's standing in front of you. You want to communicate with posterity. You want to communicate with future generations that don't have the luxury to stand before you. And the way you need to do that is by doing that process that the brain does, which is taking sensory signals from your ears, compressing it into something that can be transmitted at the speed of neural signals into the brain, reopening it and making sense of it, all in time for this guy to finish a sentence. I mean, it's so fast. And then doing the same thing when you talk, and he's doing the same thing. And so, okay, well, how do we now pass this on to posterity? How do we have a conversation with the future? And that's the advent of writing. And of course, by virtue reading or writing. But so you had this objective to communicate with posterity. And so you created pictograms first. So you're like saying, okay, well, it's a bird. Let's draw a bird. This symbol represents a bird. And it's very important that this singular symbol represents a bird, and not like your bird and my bird are different. When it comes to text in cuneiform, it's like, this is a bird symbol. Kind of looks like a bird, but it doesn't look exactly like a bird. Because if it looked exactly like a bird, the nuances of what I interpret a bird to be will be different than the ones of yours. It's going to regress what a bird is to like its most fundamental attributes and store it in, at that time, what is it, papyrus, like paper, what predates paper, so that posterity you basically define this symbol to meaning ratio. And when that happened for the first time, the brain took a break. Like the brain said, oh my God, I don't have to do this all in lifetime. And obviously you can imagine the unbelievable, civilization changing, world changing, humanity changing, species changing impact that writing had. Okay, fast forward to, hey, pictograms suck because there's a lot of things that we need to abstract into writing, and I'm not trying to draw a picture for every single thing, and I don't want to make you agree on a picture. Let's further condense information into sounds that can be articulated on paper, words and letters as a micro unit of words, and let's all agree on these. So, like, imagine the incredible amount of information, the scale of information you could process between words and images. So, like you'd have to draw a bird, or at least the lowest common denominator of bird-like attributes is a pictogram, or you can just write bird, and everybody that can speak that language knows what you mean. And you just saved such an unbelievable time. And then you can conjugate bird with other things in a way that a pictogram could just not. I mean, sometimes I sit back and think, imagine just for 1 hour you had to write in pictograms, text in pictograms. Hilariously, people already are doing that with emojis. Another episode, another video for sure. But nonetheless, I mean, you ever try to send somebody an emoji, you can understand there's a lot of information being lost. But words are remarkably fungible by almost definition, and you can concatenate them with each other. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like I don't know what the number is, but you're probably 100x the amount of processing power that had to be outsourced. One more thing. You realize that when you first kind of came to cuneiform, who are writing cuneiform? Who's writing Egyptian hieroglyphs? Priests. That's a full-time job to learn how to encode and decode this information from pictures with pictogram from your ancestors to modern times, and then to posterity, which is what writing is. And just think, like, it was a full-time job to learn how to read and write, and priests and scribes, who are the scribes of kingdom or Egypt or whatever kingdom you're talking about. And that's a full-time job. Reading and writing is a full-time job because it was so difficult. It's just one level easier than thinking, which is than speaking, which it took so many millions of years for humans to perfect. So I mean, it's a full-time job. Literally, the term scribe, right? So it was a job. Priests, religious texts, mainly at temples. Now Words are a different game. When you invent words, you start to make communication more accessible. So now it's not only a full-time priest or a full-time scribe that could communicate in written form. It was also scholars and writers and authors, and this became something that almost normal people did. So if you look at kind of the classical civilizations, Greece, Rome, China, the early Indian civilizations, Harappa. I mean, you're starting to see the advent of non-scribes reading and writing. Now, still, if you're a regular person, you're definitely not reading and writing. But now you can include royalty. And can you just imagine if you were a king in early Mesopotamia and you're like, I don't know how to read and write, and like I have to go to this priest who's in charge of this, and God knows what he's writing as I'm talking, but he's writing it. So, learning how to read and write became something that just slightly expanded with the advent of words. And by the time you really get to like the super classical societies like the Republic of Rome, you have like best-selling books. Like you have books that people still read today. They're only best-selling books because people read them today because people read them back then, like in a sense that they were meant for mass consumption. And of course, fast forward, Martin Luther translates the Bible into a colloquial lingua franca. That's happened over and over and over again, where you've made reading and writing more accessible and then the form factor of writing is able to store more of the information and transmit it in a simpler way. Printing press, he just revolutionizes, just like it's store, think about this anecdote. Like it's alleged that Alexander the Great used to sleep with a copy of Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad. I have both those books somewhere. That's cool. Like a lot of people sleep with books. But then you just think this is easily 1,000 years before the printing press. When he says he's sleeping with a copy of Homer's Odyssey, he's saying somebody wrote, like copied it by hand. So before Gutenberg invents the printing press, when you have a copy of a book, some monk usually, sat and copied it by hand. That's a copy. So it's just like even though people were able to read, the circulation of books until the printing press was so limited. I mean, that just changed the whole world. You can make an argument the printing press is more revolutionary than the internet. But then fast forward to the internet, and you have taken communication, written communication, and you're able to export it all over the world to anybody with the machine. You outsource writing to typing, and obviously the whole world gets connected to that. And today we have the most ubiquitous communication sphere that has ever existed. Okay, coming to AI. So why I bring this up is that somewhere along the way, that same priestly concept where it's like, okay, well, you need to be trained and endowed to be able to write and read, transitioned in the late 1980s, before that, but in the late 20th century, to computer programming. So if we create computers, we can transmit information. Well, we'll create computers, we can store information, create the internet, we can transmit information. Wow. But these machines, they need programming languages. Create programming languages so that you can interact with the raw machine. People don't think about this today because today programs are rarely running on the metal as people used to say. You're not writing into the actual basic of the computer. Famously Bill Gates and Paul Allen, when they went to pitch could call it Microsoft at the time to the Altair, they're writing BASIC. I mean, this is not far away from writing into a typewriter command line instructions for how the machine should behave. No screen, no keyboard. Well, some function of a keyboard to be able to enter script. That unleashes the computer revolution. Java, then C, then JavaScript abstraction languages, and the rest is history. But there's before that too, COBOL and these things that just would bend people's brains if they were to look into them today. But these are just layers and layers of machine language. And this birthed an entire profession, computer science. And this birthed, I don't know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people's jobs today and for the last 25 years has been computer programming. That's just a scribe. It's just an ancient Mesopotamian scribe. So it's like, I have an idea. I'm like some monarch in ancient Mesopotamia. I'm like a idea, and I go and I say to the scribe, hey, just I have a brilliant idea, and you're never going to guess what I have thought about last night. Please write this down. And he would maybe write it correctly or incorrectly. He's writing something. And I don't know how to do that. So I'm entrusting him to do that. And then he gives me the output, which is a piece of paper that can go into posterity or be sent to my, sent over the mail, or I don't know, it was a Pigeon Express. That's what's happening in the modern world. You are having an idea, an entrepreneur has an idea, you want to make a website, you want to make some app, you want to do some communication. Well, let's go write a computer program. And so you may not know how to do that, so you go to a computer programmer. What is he doing? He's interfacing with the machine, and hopefully the output of that is what you wanted, and you can use it the way that you wish. That's great. I mean, it's really incredible and almost difficult to overstate how much of a profession that actually is, and we just take that for granted. And so now what AI has done, what I believe AI is the evolution of that human-machine language processing interface. So now what you're saying to the AI, when you're talking to an LLM, is like, okay, I don't need anybody to interfere with this communication. Like, I don't need to speak in computer code. I don't need to write a JavaScript program. I don't need to write a Node.js program. I don't need to write, a command line program. I don't need to do anything. I'm speaking in English, and this LLM typing in English, I'm typing in English or any language, and this LLM is inferring that. And what it's doing is remarkable. We're going to make a video about how LLMs work, but it is packaging and converting every single thing that you just said into tokens, which represent moving spaces in some type of numeric graph, which then it's guessing what the next appropriate word should be and then responding to you. And on the basis of this conversion from your words to its guess as to what you want is the entire LLM revolution. Okay, well, however that's happening, that's fabulous. We'll dive into that. But what it's really saying is you can now interface with the machine without a script language. Now you're unlocking human to machine generalized conversation. It's the equivalent of unlocking human to writing without the need of any intermediary. And then with the power of what Gutenberg had, which is unlimited distribution. That's why ChatGPT and Claude are so scaled, because they have unlimited distribution and they tap into this thing that everybody wanted to do, which is interface with machines, which is nothing but the next linguistic revolution that's taking place. And so all that AI could really be is just the evolution in the medium of communication, and including machines as non-alien interaction points. When I mean alien, I don't mean like alien. I mean like that you can do it without a specialty. And what that will unlock could be much greater than the internet and obviously the printing press. But it's really just a language problem. And now we can maybe test at preposterous scale the limits of language, because you have this miraculous process, which is large language models that are doing what the human brain used to do, which then got translated into pictograms, which then got translated into words and written language, which then got translated into digital language, but required this intermediary character or a programming language. And now you're basically doing with natural language again. So that's my theory. Maybe I'm not the first person to think about it, but very interesting. And I'll be hopefully polishing this up and challenge, and maybe there's a good challenge for it and learning more about it. So let me know what you think.